All right.
All right. I did better than last time.
Yeah.
Welcome to Movie Boners, everybody. What beer are you drinking today, my good man?
Well, probably not one that's quite as on point as you so enthusiastically texted me a couple days ago. But I think it still works. I am drinking Brunette Bombshell.
Okay.
That'll
work.
Sexy beers going.
Yeah, that totally works.
Yeah, it does.
I went the other way, not the exact other way, but you'll see in a second. Mine is more on the blonde side of things. It is from the Crystal Springs Brewing Company in, I never even looked, Boulder, Colorado, and Louisville, Colorado. And it is called, hold on, where's the front of this can? Naughty Marilyn. And I feel like we will talk about a handful of things, but Marilyn Monroe particularly had a good hand in changing a couple of things or perception of things.
She kind of had like the hand. So
yeah. So it says, watch out for Marilyn because it is a 8.2% Belgian style ale, and it is ridiculously good. I think I made a face when I first sipped it. It's really good.
Mine is 8.68%. So it looks like you and I are both like, all right.
Yeah. Those, the topic is definitely about some strong visuals and people have strong feelings about them. So strong beers go with that.
Potentially the hottest topic in Hollywood. Well, one of them.
Yeah.
Definitely one of them. It should be a very interesting little conversation today, folks.
All right. So let's check in on the very first time that we actually have something interesting.
I was going to say there's going to be actual, there's something to look at now.
I'm winning, which is good news, I think, overall.
I like that you say you're winning. You've had one movie come out so far.
And my movie so far is the best movie that has come out this year that we've drafted. And in particular, because no other movies come out. But
it's true.
I have to say, I did expect Argylle to have higher than a 6.0 and higher than a 65% audience rating. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of tanked a little bit. Sounds like box office is not doing great either.
Yep. Looks like
we have a long ways to go.
18 million opening weekend. So.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'll update this so that's a little bit more accurate. And $18 million. Nothing to sneeze at, but we'll see what happens when we get through March and April.
We're off to the races. All right.
Yeah. Finally, something happened. That's good. That's good news. What? I know.
No. We have another bit of movie draft little stuff for you to update.
We do? What's that?
I finally came up with a fucking name.
Oh, all right. I totally forgot to even ask you.
I know. It's like you were expecting me to let you down again, and that's fair.
Well, it's funny. Last time I made all of those jokes about you not having selected one yet, and then I realized episode before that you took a giant paper note, and there's really no reason that you should have not remembered.
I know. Yeah, okay. I know.
So what is your fantastic draft team name?
Obviously, I wanted to be a little... I wanted to continue this being a shit to you because I kind of feel obligated to. And then I thought, I need to play off of his fucking Die Hard with a Vengeance play. So I had to think of something for that.
Okay.
And I think really the only one that just kept popping in my head, because it's so cheesy, it's so dumb, but it made me laugh, So I'm going to be dropping Gruber. So
Okay.
yeah, fuck your Simon Says, McLean all the way.
Wait, what's your name?
Dropping Grubers.
Dropping Grubers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Grubers is with it's G-U-R or G-R-U-B. Come on.
Oh, like the original.
Like Hans
You're
Gruber.
talking about
Like,
Hans. Oh,
yeah.
okay.
And his
That makes
brother.
more sense.
Jesus
I was like,
Christ.
I don't
You know, for a
remember.
movie fan, for a diehard fan,
Shut the fuck
you're
up.
really kind of shit in the bed right there, bud.
Okay, yes. That was a brain fart and a half. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Okay, that's a good rivalry. I'll
Yeah.
accept that as a name.
I thought that'd be a good play on yours.
Yeah, definitely. So, have you seen anything new lately?
I have. I watched 2 new movies recently.
All right.
Very, very recently, actually. Well, I contributed to the Argylle box office. My daughter and I went and saw it.
Good. Thank
We
you.
thought it was entertaining. It's fun. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. It's obnoxious. And I kind of feel like I was reading some of the hate on it. And the whole time I was like, all right, so everyone going into this movie, we're expecting like Kingsman 2.0 or something like that. Like the exact same movie. It's not. And I think people try to take this movie serious, which you really shouldn't.
Yeah.
It's just a fun, mindless 2.5. The runtime is a little nuts for it. It's almost 2.5 hours long, but
Oh, wow.
yeah, but
Okay.
very entertaining. My daughter and I, it made us laugh, and we enjoyed it. There's one sequence in it that I told my daughter, I was like, could have done without that because it was pretty, even for ridiculousness. That was a bit much. And she goes, yeah, but the
Yeah.
rest of the movie was cool. And I was like, all right, fair enough. So Argylle was fun. Don't take it serious.
Good.
Just go for the entertainment. And then I watched another catch-up movie from 2023 that also has a bunch of hype behind it. And unlike the other big hyped kind of lower budget like films or whatnot, artsy films, this one was actually really good.
Good.
Not up your alley. So I feel like if you watch it, you're going to be like, it was okay. Like, I feel that's exactly what your response will be to it.
Okay.
I took it as this movie might be the most honest drama I've seen for a while. It's Past Lives. It's that Korean / American film from last year. Yeah, good movie. I was a little on the fence with it for most of it, where I was like, I like this, but this is just, it almost feels too real, right? To be just a movie. But that final act, like the final third, was where it really sold it to me. And I was like, all right, the more I think about this movie, the more I really, really liked it. So Past Lives was good stuff. That was really good.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
I heard that's Christopher Nolan's favorite movie of the last year.
Oh, really?
So you're in good company, yeah.
Yeah. I very much enjoyed it.
Okay. I watched 4 things, and they're all movies.
Holy
so
shit.
No TV shows. You don't have to give me any grief this time. I'm trying to get through the DCEU, get caught up.
Oh God.
Finish it strong. So I watched Aquaman 2. Not doing it in order, obviously.
Right. I haven't even watched Aquaman yet.
Okay, I watched Aquaman 2, and mostly because part of my movie watching is dictated by what my wife is interested in, and she's like, "Yeah, well, sure, we'll check it out." Like the first Aquaman, but did also want to see how much Amber Heard was in it and all this other stuff. So I'll have to say, it was a rough start to catch up on DCEU stuff. Aquaman 2 is not good. Not good at all. The only thing worse than the CGI in it is the writing, and particularly the dialogue. There were so many times where I was like rolling my eyes at it.
All right.
And even the like physical set design was weird and terrible. So many scenes just felt so empty, and it feels like there has to be a lot cut out of it, because there's times when like it just like jumps ahead and you're like, did I miss something? What's happening? So it was a little confusing.
Okay.
Maybe because it's the last DCEU movie and the last one in a series of failures, that they honestly just didn't give a fuck about it. It reminded me of in Elf, Buddy's dad, when they're writing that book and they're like, what happened to the tomato? And they're like, it's a
Oh
kid's book.
yeah.
Nobody gives a shit about the tomato. Like, we're just missing a page. Nobody will notice. That's what it felt like. But
Okay.
interestingly,
Okay.
I expected there to be a lot less Amber Heard than there was, or as my wife calls her, Amber Turd. She's in it more than we both expected, which is not bad. I don't hate her, and I liked the Mira character, so that was all right. So yeah, that was a little rough. I probably won't ever watch it again. And then I watched Black Adam, trying to go back to the beginning because I never saw Black Adam. And it's
Okay.
so weird. I feel like the controversy around Dwayne Johnson and Henry Cavill and the movie was just buried so quickly after it came out that nobody talks about it or even remembers that Black Adam was a thing that was trying to happen. And so I was very concerned when it started, because there's so much exposition of, we're in this country and there's all of these names you need to remember, and
Right.
there's all this mystical energy with a weird name. And I was like, and then nobody that I felt like I should care about showed up for like 20 minutes. But then from there, I got sucked in pretty fast. Like, I ended up liking it quite a bit, and I was impressed with Dwayne Johnson, and I saw more Black Adam in him than Dwayne Johnson in him, which was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see that a lot. But yeah, Dr. Fate was 100% the standout for me. I really wish that we could get more of him. And he had the coolest character design of any of the characters on like superhero movies that I've seen in a really long time. So yeah, I liked Black Adam. I definitely wish that it was able to do what it wanted to do, but it wasn't bad at all. And then I watched They Cloned Tyrone, which is another. It's one that got recommended multiple times for our underrated of last year category in the awards. And so I felt like I had to watch it. And yeah, I liked it quite a lot. I thought it was very interesting, very well done, and very different. And so I agree with all the people recommending it. I liked They Cloned Tyrone quite a bit.
All right.
For a straight to streaming movie. I thought it was super good. And then lastly, kind of like your Past Lives movie, I watched another serious one that a lot of people are talking about from last year. I watched May December with
Julianne Moore, right?
Yeah, Julianne Moore and Natalie Portman and some guy that I think has been in other stuff, Charles Melton. He's been in a lot of stuff, but I'd never heard of him before.
Okay.
And it's a really interesting movie about Julianne Moore plays the wife of Charles Melton's character, and she's a lot older than him. And they had started a relationship when he was in high school and she was his teacher, and then ended up falling in love and getting married and all this stuff. And then Natalie Portman plays an actress who shows up and is going to do a movie based on her life. And so it's like trying to get to know them and get to the heart of who they really are and their relationship with each other. And they raise a lot of interesting questions about, even though you're in love, even though you're like have a family, have kids, all this stuff, wasn't it still grooming? Wasn't it still pedophilia? And how does that affect him as he grew up and all stuff? And they kind of get into it. It asks interesting questions, and I think does a lot with it. It was very, very good, and all of the actors in it were really, really good. Directing was really, really good. So I that bumped it up quite a bit. It's going to be in a handful of our categories for the awards.
Cool.
So yeah, I recommend it.
All right.
Speaking of awards, I think we're 2 episodes away from. So we have this episode coming out now. We have the Dune episode coming out after that, beginning of March. And then that's the original Dune, the David Lynch Dune. And then after that, March 17th, are the Movie Boners Awards. First ever inaugural Movie Boners Awards. And that will be an incredible time.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
We're going to have a lot of guests. We've been reaching out to a bunch of other podcasts and Instagram people, and they are psyched about presenting some awards for us. Yep. Pretty much all of our categories are already taken, so that is very exciting. I don't even know what they're going to do. Sounds like some of them might do sketches.
Oh.
What the fuck? Sketches?
Yeah. I'm so excited to just see everyone's, like, all their presentation. It's so funny. We got a message from one of them. I think it was today. I won't give it away, but kind of hinting at what they are planning on doing for their category.
Some costumes will be involved.
Yeah, and I was just ecstatic when I read it. I was like, yes. Yeah, it's going to be a good time. I'm stoked for it. It's going to be funny. It's going to be enjoyable. And it's basically going to be everything that I think we wish real award shows kind of were, but not really.
Yeah. I 100% agree. I think that's the goal. It should be a very good time. And so if you are listening to this and you're not friends with us on Instagram, you should go there because we want you to vote on who you think should win. And then we will take those votes under advisement and decide the winners after that. And we should be putting those polls up shortly after this episode comes out, I think. Yeah. So it should be good. I also am considering when we record that episode, broadcasting it live so other people can join and watch us record it and comment while we're recording it. I don't know if I'm brave enough for that. I also don't know if I'm technically savvy enough to do that and not have it fall apart, but it would be cool. So look out for that. That might be happening. I don't know yet.
We'll figure it out. But it's going to be a good time, folks. We want you to join. Obviously, when the polls are up, make sure you're putting your vote in. I'm kind of excited because I know there's probably going to be a couple that, like you and I, are probably going to debate on which ones we think should be the winners. Those should be some fun conversations and little debates. I'm stoked for it. I think it's so much fun. My daughter was looking at the nominees and the categories, and she was like, well, I don't know what half of these are, Dad. And I was like, that's okay. And then there were a couple that she was like, oh, God, Dad, why are you guys bringing that up? And I was like, because it's funny.
I know exactly what she's talking about already. Yeah, that'll be a great time. I cannot wait for that.
Yeah.
All right. So, with all that out of the way, you want to get into this very sexy episode.
Yes, let's do this. I was like, man, part of me wants to just start the episode off super immature and funny because it's kind of like on brand for us and just being like, hey, boobies. But at the same time, you're like, it gets into some weird, murky waters pretty fast. And so we'll do our best. It's going to be an interesting,
I don't know exactly what I thought when we first decided to do this. I know that it was a little entertaining coming up off of the romance episode. We're talking all about true love, and now we're like lust, the whole other side of things. But I kind of had the same thought as you. I was like, there are a lot of funny instances and funny occasions and awkward sex scenes throughout all of history. But yeah, it does also get, it's a serious topic you want to be respectful of, and a lot of people involved have had terrible experiences, and so you don't want to make light of that for sure. But and then there's a lot of people that are super okay with some of the weirdest stuff ever. So it really depends. I think we'll talk about all of it.
Yeah, it got kind of weird pretty fast for me. Watched a documentary, did some reading, did quite a bit of research on this one actually, and was like, well, both of our algorithms are probably going to be real fucking weird now. I can't wait to see what it brings up on Instagram and Facebook ads. Yay.
Yeah, I did feel weird about it because I was like, it's the first topic in a long time that I didn't do hardly any movie watching
Right.
preparation. It was mostly like reading, and then I was like needed the context of something. So I was like, what this movie, the sex scene, 1985, and then I was like, I feel weird about this. I feel like a perv, which made me Google. It did made me actually Google because it reminded me of Knocked Up, and they're putting that whole website together with sex scenes and stuff, and all the dialogue
nudity
is always in my head. And then it reminded me of Mr. Skin, the old website from back in the day that like cataloged all of the like this many minutes into this movie, this actress gets naked and shows boobs or shows full nudity or is just sexy or whatever. It's still up. That website is still online.
Oh God.
Mr. Skin has been going strong since 1999 for 25 years. So I don't know if you have to pay a subscription or whatever like you used to, but it's definitely still very active. And I don't know if that seems like a bad thing, but it was hilarious to me that it was still there.
Still going. All right. Yeah. I thought of the scene in Knocked Up. Well, it's not even just a scene. Like I thought of the group of friends, their whole
like
project.
Subplot.
Yeah, the subplot of like for making this website. It's not just going to be about like topless shots. It's full nudity. It's all of it. You know, do they show bush or do they not? Yeah. Yeah, I thought of that little bit and was like, wow, Jake and I are like that this week, but not because I found myself like, okay, as I'm doing Google searches, how can I word the search so that it doesn't come across as like pervy and gross, but like educational?
Yeah. This is very serious research and respect women. Yeah. It's funny.
It does get so the first thing I did was I had seen this documentary like a year or so ago and then remembered it for this episode and was like, well, I'm obviously going to sit back down and rewatch this documentary. Couldn't remember the name of it though. So I had to look up like nudity documentaries, which brings up a whole weird list. But I found it. So highly recommend it. Well, no. I partially recommend this one because it goes from being really interesting and kind of really diving pretty deep into the history of like nudity and sex scenes in film. But then it just becomes like, we're going to list every movie that seems to have a lot of nudity in it or like weird sex scenes. It just kind of starts listing them like bullet points, and it kind of, I felt, loses the whole point of what I think the documentary was originally intended for. But it came out during an interesting time in Hollywood. It came out during the Me Too movement. So they kicked the whole thing off with all the history on that. So it kind of kicks off really intense. And you feel kind of gross right out the gate. But I guess that's kind of the point. And then, just...
It was a gross time when they had every actor and producer you've ever heard of start getting accused of stuff.
And the Harvey Weinstein's, stuff, that's like the all-encompassing of it. It does weird me out whenever I like pop in a movie from the 90s that was done by the Weinstein property, and you're like, ooh, gross. Okay. You're like,
right. It just puts a bad film over everything.
It does. It's got a weird like asterisk next to every movie that he produced. But kind of a little more serious topic than I think I originally thought it would be. And then I also had to laugh halfway through like the week because this would be the second episode. I think you and I went into it expecting to like giggle and chuckle about and kind of poke fun at. That kind of like reverts it back onto us and is like, oh no, actually you're not going to feel great about half of what you're about to learn. So
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, closely related to a couple of previous episodes. There's the episode we did about the most offensive movies ever had a lot of very dark and disturbing scenes involving nudity, but also involving rape and all other gross stuff. And then also tied back into the MPAA rating system episode we did, kind of breaking down its whole history and stuff.
Yeah.
You can't talk about that. We're talking about probably the most prominent feature of film that has made them, rate them, and censor them, and all that stuff. And that's pretty much nudity has always been a hot topic, a taboo topic for sure.
Yeah. I know we had talked about like the what was it called, the producers document or whatever it was
the
called,
Hays Code,
or the Hays, the Hays Code,
the code of conduct. Yeah,
we had kind of briefly talked about the Hays Code in our MPAA episode, but really learning about it here and kind of, God, Hollywood's so fucking weird how like it was Hays combined with this whole Catholic sect that decided they were the ones that were going to rule over films. And it was like, well, that's ironic that group of Catholics were the original like censors of Hollywood.
Yeah. I read about the legion of what is it called? They're like a legion of disdecency.
Yeah.
And they rated movies A, B, or C. And A is like, this is A-okay. And then B is, you should not probably see this movie, but it's okay, I guess. And then C is like, this is the worst thing that you've ever seen.
C was essentially, you will burn in hell if you even look at the cover of this movie. It was to the point where like priests would be telling their congregations which movies were allowed for the congregation to watch. and the idea that it's going to scare people from seeing it. But as everyone knows, human nature is like, you told me I'm not supposed to do this thing without giving me any actual reasons why. I'm going to go check it out. And that's kind of what ended up happening was more people started flocking to you're going to burn for watching this kind of movie.
It must mean that there's really good stuff in it if they don't want me to see it. So I got to check it out.
What took me off guard, I think the most was, and just to kind of dive into a little bit of the history real quick. I know we just kind of jumped like 30 years into when after the controversy of nudity in film had already come out. And that was during the silent, like as soon as film or movies were made, nudity was a part of it, which I didn't quite realize. Like right out the gate, one of the first thoughts we had was, well, let's put some boobs in this. Like,
it's weird to think of like people from olden times being psyched about that kind of stuff and like being horny or whatever. It's just like, well, it's partly that, but it's also partly like Michelangelo and all these classic painters have always painted nudes, and nudity has always been a part of art. So I think there could be that influence for sure, but then there also has to be the basic human nature of, I would really like to see some boobs right now.
So in that documentary that I watched, which I can't remember if I said it, but it's called Skin: The History of Nudity in Film. In that documentary, and then also through other research, I ended up learning that nudity was also kind of started off as an act of rebellion or spiteful move when it came to filmmaking. So Edison, just to give you like real history real quick, Edison claimed he had made the first moving picture, like the movie camera. He claimed that he did this, but he actually
claimed a lot of bullshit.
He claimed a lot of bullshit, but this was a big one that he claimed the first moving picture camera. And if you want it, and he like patented it, and he created this whole team, and they called themselves the Trust. And if anyone wanted to make a moving picture, they had to pay Thomas Edison and the trust to have permission to make any moving picture. People
like a
didn't want to
monopoly on
pay
it.
Thomas Edison this because, fuck you, dude. And so there was this whole other group, kind of independent film, like wannabe filmmakers. I think they actually called themselves independents, but they decided to kind of make their own production, make their own moving picture cameras, and then realized, well, we don't have any gimmick. We have no way to bring in money. We have no way to do any of this to even compete with Edison. And so, like, the first thought they had was, well, let's throw some skin in the film. And the birth of nudity in moving pictures
works
comes
every
about.
time.
And it worked. And as soon as it was successful and kicking things off for a little while, it started to really like rub people the wrong way. And I realized real quick, we're probably going to use all the wrong lingo. So if you feel like you have to giggle at all the little, do it. There's no avoiding
There's a lot
it.
of dancing around the words, as we are also not the most comfortable. We're
not the most mature to tackle a subject like this, but we're attempting. Bear with us.
Do our best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that was like 1887, early 1900s that came out.
Okay.
And then because of that, it started sparking a lot of debate, a lot of hot, like, holy crap, we can't be showing this in any kind of area. So then weird rules kind of came down for it, where any nudity was kind of deemed like scandalous and this is gross. You can't be showing this unless, and it's funny that you brought up Michelangelo, unless the nudity was done as an art model. So no movement, no actual acting. Your nude model can stand perfectly still and you are allowed to show nudity, but that's it. And so that's kind of how, like, that was the first gray area that these filmmakers started going towards. They based it on this model in New York. I forget her name. But she, like, I guess she inspired a whole bunch of statues that are all over New York City. She did a couple of these silent films where she played like multiple characters in one, but she was always nude. And then it started going, like, getting more and more. And that was around 1930 as well, when Will Hayes was appointed the front man, because in Hollywood, suddenly everyone's like, we got to rein this in. We can't be having boobs and butts up on the screen, because shockingly, there was a lot. From the early 1900s, so I think it was like 1911 or something like that, to 1930, tons of these movies had so much nudity in them, and so everyone's freaking out. And then you have everyone that's like also for it and not seeing anything wrong with it. So it's interesting that right out the gate, act of spitefulness and kind of rebellion, we're going to throw boobs at the screen. And then at the same time, it was like, well, now we have to immediately find a gray area to get away with doing this before they decide to stomp that too. And Hollywood kind of like self-regulated, self-governed, but then also tried to govern all of it. It's very interesting in those first like 30 years of film.
It's really crazy to think of, like, because when I think of like the 20s, 30s, and 40s, I think of very proper, very polite, very conservative. And it's crazy that how much nudity there was in films very early on. And then it's kind of been throughout history that the pendulum kind of swings back and forth. They're like, oh, wait, that's too much. We need to control it. And then they control it a little too much. And then it becomes kind of that rebellion of, no, we're going to fight back against the man and find, like you'd mentioned, that they have that first gray area. That kind of seems like the thing, that there's always a gray area, and then they push the boundaries a little further. And just throughout history kind of have always done that. And then, but it's weird to think of, like, nowadays, you kind of think that nowadays is the most free and liberal and and sexualize open, and people don't care as much as they did back then. But I don't think that's the case. After watching a lot of these, like, even 50s and 60s and 70s movies, I'm like, people would not go for that these days. There would be so many people online, like, losing their minds over these movies.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I had the same thought of, like, I think it also has something to do with, like, there's so much more exposure towards it these days. Everyone is subjected to it, no matter what you do. I mean, we joked about our algorithms are going to probably be a little weird for a little while.
Yeah.
It's like we're force fed kind of as a desensitization, we're being desensitized.
Yeah, it's
towards
true.
It.
It's definitely true. Even, like, outside of movies, on, like, my personal Instagram, there's constantly, like, just chicks going up. And it's not even the crazy thing. This is a tangent because it's not movie related, but the craziest thing is I'm seeing more and more accounts that are not even real people, that are very obviously like an AI face put on. And there's just some dude in a basement, like, making bank by his millions of followers from this fake girl that he's made dance around almost naked or pretty much naked. And then, yeah, it's a weird thing with that pendulum swinging, because it does kind of seem like we are more exposed to it, and it's kind of saturated society almost too much, it seems like. And so that rebellion, I see it online kind of coming in, and it has become like the punk thing, the punk rock rebellious thing, to, like, not be into that stuff and be more conservative, be more like, kids are like, it's actually cool to be, like, super Christian and super. I'm like, no, it's never been cool. Like, I was a little Christian dork and nobody ever thought I was cool. So I don't know how you get away with it. But yeah, they're, like, very, like, anti OnlyFans, anti all this stuff. And they're like, they're trying to swing the culture back or find the middle or something.
Well, I think that's what,
and they're not entirely wrong. It's definitely a weird thing that's happening.
I think it kind of, like, comes down to that principle of, like, you have to find a middle ground. And the problem is like, we have been swinging this pendulum so much, we never just let it settle down. It's always, we have to keep it in one extreme or the other. And
that's the craziest thing. Is, like, in all of human history, we haven't figured it out.
right. Like, and you have moments in some movies where, like, the nudity will actually kind of make sense. It actually serves the story. It won't be gratuitous. It won't be just, the director and writer just wanted to jerk off on set. Bad joke. I know, guys. I know.
Partly bad joke, partly not a joke, though. I feel
unfortunately, kind of true. If you look at films like before, I hate saying it this close, but before, like, 2015, even 2017, that was a reality on some sets.
Yeah.
So
there was a time period, as we're kind of jumping through history, but there was a time period where nudity started becoming pretty mainstream, and it stopped being like a niche independent thing that was happening, and Hollywood was okay with it. Kind of post-code era, leaving that, it had become very old-fashioned, and then they kind of moved into the MPAA rating system, which doesn't make any real judgments. It's just like, just so you know, there's boobs in this.
Right.
You may or may not care. It doesn't mean it's bad or good. But then there were, like, Russ Myers. I'm sure everybody's heard of Russ Myers films. He's pretty much famous for being the spearhead of pointless nudity movies and just any excuse to have naked chicks in it. And then he became very successful distributing these movies outside of the main Hollywood system. And so Hollywood's like, you know what, maybe nudity's not so bad after all. Maybe we could use some of that money. And so, like, not that long after that, the producers were actually telling filmmakers, they're like, you should have, if this is going to be an R-rated movie, you should have a couple of nudity.
Yeah.
It's like, find an excuse for someone to take their top off. I mean, come on. And so they're getting pressure from the studios to not only... This is the weird part for me, is like, everybody, you watch a movie and then someone takes their top off and there's some boobs or a butt or whatever, and you're like, yeah, it's pretty cool. Like, it's not bad. Most people don't care that much. Some people care a lot, both directions. They really want it and they're a little weird about it, and then some people really don't want it and they're a little weird about it. But for most people, it's, you know, it's can be good, can be nice. But it's weird that you'll be watching this movie and and it's just a quick scene and you're like, yeah, that was okay, that was nice. And then if you really think about it though, how much work goes into casting a lady, going through several ladies to for this part, figure out who should have it, and then all of this complicated technical setup of shooting the scene, who's going to be in the room with them, what's the temperature, what's the clothing situation, all of the rehearsals, all of the, like, there's so much work that goes into this, and it's so awkward for them. It has to be for most of the time.
Reading interviews with actors and actresses on sets who have filmed, like, a nude scene is one thing where they're like, yeah, you know, you have X number of people on set when you do a nude scene. And it's usually, from what I gathered on all this stuff, was there's not much difference when it's just a nude scene, whether it's male or female, in terms of who's all still on set, who's allowed to be on set. But when it comes to the sex scene, they were more relaxed pre-Me Too. Post-Me Too, a whole new job was created, which kind of shocked me that I was like, how was this not actually already a thing? Because I feel like this is such a... To not regulate sex scenes in films, especially having seen some movies. I mean, I think everyone has seen at least a couple films where it'll have a sex scene that everyone has a thought of like, wow, this is going on for quite a while, or wow, that's a lot of extra rigorous humping. What is going on?
A little more than is necessary. Yeah.
Right. So I was shocked to learn that I think they're called like the intimacy coordinators, something like
coordinators. That.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't really become a job until like 2017, 2018. And that's the person who is on set, who does regulate who is on the closed set, who's allowed to be on the set, and how much contact, how much, like, they actually stick to the contract made and then make sure every little pinpoint of it is followed. I am for that. I think that's good for the actress, the actor. I think it helps create a safer environment. Kind of grossed out that we didn't have that beforehand, just because having seen some of these movies that have some pretty lengthy scenes in it, you're like, can you imagine having to film this in front of all these people? And then, you know, what scene popped in my head was in The Disaster Artist.
What?
When they film one of the sex scenes, and just the way that, like, Franco's character treats the actress, and it's not a closed set, and it's like, is that how it always is? It kind of like, it challenged me a little bit, and I was like, ooh, this is like making even more gray area for me. Like, okay, weird.
Yeah, that's definitely true, and I was surprised by that as well. And then also the whole, like, the nudity rider and nudity contract, like, there's a whole special section. If you're going to do nudity, if you're going to do sex scenes, they have to, at least nowadays, accurately, like, describe what's expected, who will be there, where it will be, what the situation is, what they're going for, like, everything that you're being asked to do, so that you can, like, negotiate it or agree to it. And then everybody has to agree to it, obviously. And then if they change things, that's the weird thing, is like, when you're making a movie, everything can be pretty fluid. Like, you have an idea of what you want to happen, but that's never what actually ends up on film. And so you get there, so there's technical issues, the camera breaks down, the weather's wrong, lighting's weird. You have ideas, you're constantly writing new things. You're like, oh, wouldn't it be great if we did this instead? Or if you could do that. You can't do that. Like, you have to say, pump the brakes, are you okay with doing XYZ now that we decided to change it, and then
Yeah.
get it amended and get it, you agree to it and all this stuff, which is good. You don't want, I mean, there are, it goes both ways. There are certainly people that are fine with it. They're like, yeah, whatever. Like, let's do it. That sounds great. Let's just do it. I'm down. And then there are other people that don't feel comfortable voicing a concern or speaking up for themselves, especially with, it depends on if the director's made you comfortable or everybody involved with the production has made you
Yeah.
feel comfortable, like you can speak up. Or if not, there are a lot of very difficult people to work with that are, you feel like if you speak up, you'll never work in this town again, kind of stuff.
Right.
And so it's definitely, I think that power dynamic people are more aware of now, and putting in more things to help people feel comfortable not doing things they're not comfortable with is good
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, I mean, you just brought it up. Yeah. At one point in Hollywood, it was true that if an actress refused to do a nude scene in a movie that they were signed on, they were blatantly told, like, well, you're not doing this movie, or I guess that's your career then. Like, and it was weird
Mhm.
because nudity in film has always kind of been taboo. And then it went to like, if you did nudity, you had no career. And then it shifted,
Mhm.
and your beer definitely alludes
Mhm.
to this. Marilyn Monroe really was like the first one to kind of shatter that uh, mentality of, if you do nudity, it's going to ruin your career in film. It was her and two other women. Um, one of them was like a Marilyn Monroe lookalike, and the three of them kind of like, not at the same time, but they followed each other's tracks, kind
Mhm.
of proved to Hollywood that, like, no, nudity can make a career, which is kind of equally as dangerous,
Yeah.
right? Like that.
Yeah, it definitely is. Like, if you feel like this is my shot, this is what I gotta do, I won't say no to anything so that I definitely
Right.
will make it. That's not helpful or
That's
good for anybody.
I it sparked, how I recently saw like Poor Things, and I had some pretty hot takes on that movie because fuck that
Mhm.
movie. But I had said when I was ranting about it, like, I feel everything that Barbie did to build women up and show them that it's okay to just be a woman. Like, there is
Yeah.
nothing wrong with just being a woman. There's so much strength in that, and to not have to
Mhm.
worry about relying on societal tropes or whatever, or tropes that you're building in your own head. Um,
Yeah.
Poor Things, in my opinion, rips all of that apart by showing you're only going to experience a fulfilling life if you let men take advantage of you
Yeah. Without.
sexually, like, and kind of convince you that that's the healthiest route to go in life. And I feel like that pendulum of nudity and sex scenes are going to make your career. I feel like that it made Poor Things pop in my head, and it fueled that opinion of mine even more, especially reading
Mhm.
interviews, watching interviews with actors and actresses on how they, like, I really hated doing this nudity. It was so weird. I hated the set. Like, you don't feel comfortable.
Mhm.
It's like, man, what? Like, you can
Yeah.
always. It also kind of brought back that rule of thumb that you and I always talk about, especially in terms of like horrible content in film or in stories, where you can allude to it without ever actually
Yeah.
showing anything, and it's just as effective. I kind of found myself thinking, like, man, there's so many instances, and even in a lot of movies that I'm a fan of, where like you could have alluded to some of the nudity or some of the sex, and the movie would have worked just fine. It works great
Mhm.
in comedies. Um,
Yeah, I think in some of those cases, alluding to it works even better because the audience's imagination can be better than
yeah,
anything that you would put on film. But then also, some of those things are so stark and surprising or different that it can take the audience out of the movie pretty quickly. and they can be like, oh, I read an interesting thing that Steven Soderbergh said for a commentary from Out of Sight, that movie between Jennifer Lopez and George Clooney.
Yeah.
He was saying that as soon as actors take their clothes off in a movie, you're watching a documentary, because it's very easy for the audience to just break with that film and suddenly be like, I'm seeing Jennifer Lopez naked right now. I don't have any context for the character or the scene or whatever. It's like, no, this is the audience just reverts back to, oh, I'm seeing Marilyn Monroe naked right now, and that's a big deal or whatever. And so it can definitely take the audience out of it as much or more than actually help the film, I think, in a lot of cases. I'm not opposed to nudity in any way, but I think that it's like anything. It should be used intentionally and poignantly, not haphazardly. And there's a lot of hilarious ways to use nudity. There's a lot of serious ways to use nudity. There's a lot of effective ways to do it, but there's also a lot of dumb reasons to do it.
I feel like it's so goofy saying this, knowing like some of my favorite movies growing up as like an adolescent 13-year-old boy were chock full of nudity.
That's the thing, is because I was preparing this whole time in my 35-year-old brain, and I was like, I'm very mature. I can handle this. I'm not gonna giggle. I'm not gonna be like, ooh, she's so pretty or whatever. I'm very mature. I can handle this. And then I remembered my young self and how much there were times in my life where I would wish that there was just a random scene for no real reason where someone would take their clothes off.
Yeah.
And that would be the best if that could happen. And so
I know I'm not
the has only merit on some level.
Right. I know I'm not the only one. When I was a teenager, or even like a year or two before I turned into like an actual teen, there's that weird space of time where you would see a movie, like a trailer for a movie, and it'd say rated R, and your first thought would be like, oh, I wonder if there's boobs. And then like sometimes it would give you the reasoning why it was rated. Not always, but sometimes. And if you ever saw Nudity, it was like, well, I have to see this movie. I have to see like whatever actress it is that's gonna bear all, right?
Yeah.
And what was funny is like I thought back on those times and laughed at myself for it, because there was a handful of movies I remember like watching simply because it said nudity on the case, and then the nudity would be like a butt, or you never saw the actual nudity. It'd be like a silhouette or in like a sheer nightgown or whatever. So it like counts, but it doesn't. And just being like, that was it? That was the nudity?
I did the exact same thing. I did the exact same thing many times, because we grew up in similar households.
We did.
And our parents, my parents, I'm sure your parents were the same way. My parents were pretty strict about nudity. I think most American families are much more strict about nudity than they are about violence. And so there were scenes that would come up. I'd be watching a movie at home with my whole family, and then you'd get your eyes covered up real quick. and I would try to look under and see the timestamp on the VCR. And then someday when I'm home alone, I'm going to fast forward it. And then I would get there and I'd be like, that's it? That's like the one I remember specifically, that my parents being surprised that there was nudity in the movie because they'd forgotten, because it is very quick, is Die Hard. And the terrorists show
the chick
up
on the table?
A couple out of the office.
Yeah. Or on the desk, not the office. Table, yeah.
And then there's also the posters in the hallway, in the service corridor. But yeah, it's super fast. And I was like, I really expected more from this whole experience, because that was not what I was looking forward to. There was a lot of those. I'm not gonna lie.
Yep. Yeah, there was a good.
Do you remember what like your first nude scene was that you remember like seeing and being like, "Wow"? Did that happen?
Yeah. Man, The first one though, because I feel like I was a pretty
or a formative one
I feel like I
that
was
stands
pretty
out.
stereotypical as a 13-year-old boy or 12-year-old boy, however old, and seeing boobs on the screen and having that like, oh my god, boobs.
Yeah.
I can actually tell you, yeah, I'm pretty positive, and this one will probably make you laugh, Jake. This will probably make you laugh
Okay.
really hard. The first time I remember kind of being like, whoa, like those were boobs, was I was at a friend's house and he had told me we have to watch Time Cop. And I remember being like, I'm not a big Jean-Claude Van Damme fan, but okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then learning very quickly that we were only watching Time Cop for one scene. And I
Yeah.
can't even remember when the scene comes up. And it's not even that great a nudity. No offense to but like as a young boy.
Yeah.
And so I know Time Cop was probably the first one that was like, oh man, I just saw nudity when the parents weren't around. Ho, ho, ho.
Mm-hmm.
But let's be honest. The first one for our age group that made all of
Mm-hmm.
us boys just be like, holy hell, I can't believe there's boobs on the screen. It's got to come down to American Pie. And when you saw Nadia or Titanic, when you saw Rose, it's one of those two. The Titanic one makes me
Titanic was
laugh.
very iconic.
Yeah, Titanic, I'll put that one ahead. Well, no, see, I can't, because although I saw Titanic in the theater,
Mm-hmm.
my mom was very quick to be like, cover your eyes. And so the screen was huge, but I had my mom's hand like covering my face. So I didn't technically see it on the big screen that time. But when we got the VHS double cassette set, yeah, you can bet there was like, as soon as the folks were gone running errands for a day, it was like, fast forward. I know it's towards the end of tape one. Yeah. What about
your parents get home? Your parents get home. They're like, why is there so much static on this scene? I don't understand. It's like someone has rewound and fast forwarded it so many times.
It's like the VHS is like been conditioned to just pause on this one scene. What is happening here? What about you,
wore it out. Yeah, no, I would say Under Siege, the scene from Under Siege where the stripper is in the cake and she falls asleep because she took too much Dramamine, and then pops out after this ship is under siege by terrorists and does a little dance. It was one of the formative nude scenes of my life that I'll always remember, for sure. That has to be one. Yeah. And then I had a weird thing. I feel like possibly the most iconic nude scene of all time would be Phoebe Cates coming out of the pool in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And everybody knows that scene and talks about that scene. I didn't realize until this week, though, that movie was directed by a woman, Amy Heckerling.
Yes.
And I think it shows in the sense that scene, while iconic and while so many people have had it burned into their brains, it works so well because it's not one of the more like, oh, I don't understand how she had her top ripped off. It actually makes sense in the context of the story, and it sells a good joke with Judge Reinhold and how the fantasy is so much better than the reality, which is awkward and embarrassing and terrible.
Yeah. The nudity, that scene in Fast Times, that one, I think every boy has seen. Everyone knows that scene, like you said. I remember going to like friends' houses and we'd watch movies like Animal House because we knew there was nudity. Again, like the nudity is not what I think a boy at that age actually expects it to be. It kind of ends up always being like, so they're literally just there. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like that's all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just lost my train of thought there for a second. God, so many boobs on the mind.
Yeah, it's distracting for sure.
Very distracting.
Yeah, It's one of the weird things. I feel like the 80s was definitely the peak for like that college teen comedy time period with like Animal House and movies like that, Porky's, things like that. There's a lot of those big iconic movies. It was interesting reading about like the history and how when they first started like putting nudity in movies and getting past the code era and starting to find the edges of where that was allowed and stuff. One of the things that they were allowed to do was these like nudist camp movies, which
Nudies.
had no real plot or anything. It was just people being naked and walking around and not doing much, or like they always tried to frame it in like a educational or fitness thing. So they'd be like playing basketball or swimming or doing something like
Well,
that.
it was essentially like nudists wanted representation, so they made their own movies. And yeah, it's just super like nothing's happening. They're literally just hanging out doing normal things. Everyone's naked. I can't ever like hear the word nudist without thinking of the scene from A Shot in the Dark with Peter Sellers where he has to walk through a
Yeah.
nudist camp. That's just a great gag scene. There's no nudity on it, but the way they play off like all the censoring is just, it's brilliant. Sorry,
Yeah,
go
that
ahead.
has to be playing into that trope that everybody in the time period was familiar with.
Yeah.
And then but building on that, then they had, everybody's heard of stag films. Like that's even though that's not a thing and hasn't been a thing for at least one, maybe two generations in the past, I feel like that still is a thing that comes up. And so I was like, what even is a stag film? And it's really like kind of like building off of the nudist camp movies where there's just random women coming on screen, taking their clothes off, they're basically dancing, but they're always like super cheap 16 millimeter, basically home video before they had home video movies that you could play at bachelor parties or whatever, and no real plot. But the building on the camp nudie movies, what they started trying to make it interesting, and they would have like a guy chase them around, and that basically started the whole horror genre of naked women in horror movies. And it's always been kind of like a part of its heritage. Horror movies have this heritage of kids having sex, and that being the reason that they're being killed, and then the final girl is a virginal figure. It builds into that very quickly, but it's always kind of been a thing they can't get away from.
And the original Halloween movie kind of inadvertently started the whole if you take your clothes off, if you have sex, you're going to die trope. John Carpenter never meant for that to be a thing. He just, that wasn't what his intentions were. It just kind of, I guess, naturally, or maybe not naturally, but that's the trope that it ended up creating, especially in slasher films. Because like creature features would have some nudity sometimes, but not near as much. Whereas if it was a slasher film, you're gonna see a ton of boobs. Like it's gonna happen, and pretty much every pair you see, they're gonna get killed. Like they're not gonna make it through the film. It is funny that whole Hollywood trope, especially with horror films, really did kind of like build off of the nudie films and those stag films where it'd be like a guy in a monkey suit chasing the women across the screen just so that you would have movement, so that they weren't just standing around, defining gratuitous, nude scenes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like a lot of people have had conversations and written whole papers around like the relationship between violence and nudity, and horror movies has always kind of had that. And Psycho is such a prominent example, even though there's not strong nudity compared to most of the movies that we've seen and are talking about. But I feel like for Psycho and Janet Leigh, Is it Janet
Yeah.
Leigh?
Yeah, Janet Leigh.
Okay, thank you. And Janet Leigh, she refused to do
I
nudity,
was
and
gonna
so
say
she
she's
actually had
not
to
even
have
in
a
the
body
shower. That's a
double.
body double in the shower
Yeah, and
scene.
so a lot of that like quick cutting and stuff was partly Hitchcock style, but also partly him trying to hide the fact that they're using a body double in
Yeah.
the shower. And there is slight nudity, but it's not terribly strong or prominent.
I
But I
think
think that that's interesting, the concept of a body double, that we need to have nudity here, but the main actress isn't interested in doing it, so we'll just get somebody else to pretend to be her.
and the body double really became kind of common after Psycho. I think Psycho's an interesting one to bring up because the nudity in that shower scene is not really there. I mean, honestly,
Mhm.
everyone knows the shower scene. It might be one of the all-time most iconic scenes, period,
Mhm.
in the history
Yeah.
of film, and deservedly so. I mean, that when it came out, that movie by itself freaked audiences out, but that scene really got to people. I think why so many people associate the shower scene with like the nudity and stuff, because I saw it get brought up a handful of times. Um,
Mhm.
I think it brings up the idea of like the shower is your absolute most vulnerable spot. You can't escape
Yeah.
anywhere. You can't go anywhere. You have nothing on. I mean, you are fully exposed. And I think that's why so many people associate it with the nudity is because, like, well, it's a shower scene. You're naked in a shower.
Yeah.
But Hitchcock's style, the way he filmed it and had to cut it with the body double and with Janet Leigh, um,
Mhm.
I think that really shows the strength of not relying on the nudity in a film to be effective for your story. Uh, it's just another one of those because, like you said earlier, like I'm not opposed to nudity. Typically, nudity doesn't
Mhm.
bother me at all in a film. I think the best nude scenes in a film is when it's like a joke. I think I think one of the best uses of nudity ever is actually forgetting Sarah Marshall. I think it's one of the funniest bits ever.
Yeah.
Mainly because it happened to Jason Segel in real life, so that's just good stuff. Like that's funny.
It rings true, yeah.
Like male nudity is hilarious because it's so awkward. It just that's the fact of it. Um,
Yeah, I was trying to think about that, like, quite a bit actually, about the differences between male nudity and female nudity, and and I feel like and I was thinking about it and then Googling it, I was like, is it just me? Obviously, for me as a heterosexual man, I will be like, yeah, a woman being naked, that's just beautiful. Everybody likes that. There's nothing wrong with that. But a man being naked is weird or hilarious or not very pleasant at best. And but then I was like, I think that women in general feel the same way too, that they're not terribly excited about seeing a naked man on screen either. And and so if you're a gay man, maybe, but probably I would imagine it's more of the man side of thing. I think of like being like, I want to see something that I like, whereas women are like, I would like to experience or feel or have this whole story or whatever. That's more attractive to me. That rich character or whatever. They're more evolved than we are. But we're like, I would like to see a boob, and that would be good. But if I see a wiener, it'll be hilarious, and it
it
often is. I
often
would say
is.
yes, Sarah Marshall. Sarah Marshall is hilarious, but also the scene in Borat where you have
Oh yeah,
him
the hotel fight
and
scene.
his very overweight partner fighting each other. Uh, that is hilarious, mostly because you know how much Sacha Baron Cohen is committing to the bit and putting himself in those very awkward and terrible situations,
Terrible
and they can't
situation.
help but laugh. Yeah. When you
uh,
have someone else's testicles on your face, you know you're in a bad spot.
right, but he's like it sells the joke. It's part of
Hmm.
that character. It's part of that story, and it's for the joke. That's the purpose of it. I
Yeah.
I was very surprised to find out in preparation for this episode how much male nudity there actually has been. There is way more male nudity than I thought they have really done. And
Yeah.
shockingly, the majority of it seems to be based in like the 70s and 80s movies. like mid 70s. And then there was not a lot. And then there's a handful of movies that come out where it's like dick, 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 dick. And you're like, good Lord. And then there's nothing. And then we start turning like male nudity into kind of a joke.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because, like, if I watch a serious movie that has male nudity in it, usually it's just like, okay. I usually will take it as not a interesting part to the story or serve any purpose to the story. My brain will usually just kind of wire it to like, oh, filmmaker just wanted to be like, ooh, we'll shock the audience right here. Ha ha. And then I just kind of roll my eyes at it. I'm looking at you, Saltburn. God, your movie sucks.
It does seem to have that effect primarily because it never looks good. Like it always looks
so
terrible.
Yeah. Like,
and it's everybody. It doesn't help that it's always 70s and 80s, and so there is always a giant bush involved, also. But it's never flattering or appealing in any way whatsoever.
In any way. And I'm like, penises just, they're so weird. They're so awkward. Yeah. You just brought it up a little bit, you know, this sounds so, I don't want to say like sexist, but I'm sorry, guys. There's just no good way to put this. You see a naked woman and it's like, it is beautiful. You're very like awesome, cool.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like women even tend to be okay with seeing female nudity in a film. I could be wrong. Don't add us.
That's the perception I get as well. Yeah.
But it seems to be like, this is a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
You see naked males and it's like, what the fuck? Why?
It's kind of like, I feel the same way I imagine women feel, which is, why are you showing me this? This is not helpful in any way.
Like, penises are weird. They just are.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
don't
think it's just movies. I was trying to think this through because I like back to the Michelangelo stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, even statues, even the Sistine Chapel, even all of these things, I'm like the chiseled, jacked David looks pretty good until you get to right about here, and then you're like, it's just never fits. Like it never looks like it belongs there, you know?
It's just like, well, we had to put it somewhere, so that's where it ended up. Like, I guess this is the spot. We have, it's almost like, if you believe in God just had that moment of like, shit, I forgot this part. What do I do with it?
Yeah. This is really important. We need it to be somewhere prominent and available. Otherwise they will die immediately as a species.
Slap it there. They can cover it with a leaf. We're good. It's in a spot that it can always get covered up and just pretend like it's not there. Guess what?
Yeah.
That's how the history of man.
The colder it gets, the easier it is to cover up. but compared to like a woman or a muse and a painting and all this stuff, it's like everything about just shape and style and curve and everything. It works and it makes sense and it's art. It's always art. It seems like.
Yeah, and that I mean, this could all just be. I could hear both arguments. Like, I imagine people freaking out. Don't freak out. We're just, you look at, you know, ancient art, like you said, those statues and all that. And the muses, the women, like that kind of nudity, it's always appealing. Not just sexually, but like, it's just, this looks correct.
Yeah. It's appealing in the sense that there's a beauty about it. And I think we're finding that more and more, especially these days, that so much of life has lost its beauty that buildings are no longer beautiful and everything is cluttered and gross and covered in neon and signs and or just square boxes
everywhere. Good God.
And I think we as a species just really need beauty and inspiration and things like that. And so I think that that's a lot of what that ancient art is and all of that stuff. But it does seem to be, at least from what I can tell, in my small little brain, that's what it definitely looks like. It's like that the female form is ideal, and then the male form is just very like utilitarian. It's like it gets the job done, but nobody's really grateful for it.
Like, I guess it's practical. Yeah, you can get some use out of it. Yeah.
They can make some babies. You can send them to die in war. That's about it.
It's like otherwise it's just there. And
get out there, build a bridge. Yeah. Anyway.
I feel like we weren't going to make it through this episode without making fun of our own gender. I'm kind of shocked we made it over an hour into it before we started making fun of ourselves, but you can't help it, dude. When I watched that documentary and they were showing clips and they're like, suddenly there was like all this male nudity. Richard Gere showed his penis on screen in American Gigolo. And instantly I was like, was that the one that I watched that I absolutely hated? I don't think it was. I think it was some other shitty movie of his.
If you talk about Richard Gere and being naked, I could think of the rumor that he put a gerbil in his butt or whatever it was.
I thought that was Hugh Grant.
No, it was definitely
that was Richard Gere. Yeah,
maybe it was both.
No, you're right. It was Richard Gere. Yeah, the gerbil in the
butt. But I was going to say, before we leave the concept of the two different genders and how men's nudity tends to be more hilarious than female nudity, which tends to be more beautiful. I did have one example where there's a very hilarious lady nudity scene. Particularly, you don't often see the bottom half of a lady being hilarious, but in Mike and Dave Need Wedding Dates,
yes,
that pube area shot and joke is one of the funniest naked jokes I've ever seen in a movie, and so that the ladies get credit for that one for sure.
Yeah, nudity as a joke, it works so well most of the time. It really can work great. It makes you laugh. Yeah. It kind of brings, I think when nudity gets used as a joke, it kind of helps combat that mentality that you brought up from Steven Soderbergh, where it like will take the audience out of the film. I think if it's done as that joke, you stay with the joke. You can stay with the character and being like, oh, this is, I chuckled at that because awkward nudity, from what I kind of learned and just realized, I guess, awkward nudity kind of works the best.
It really should be the most relatable thing ever because everybody has skin all over their body. Everybody is naked at some point during the day. Like it's the kind of thing that it shouldn't be weird and shouldn't be taboo. It should be the most normal thing ever. And I think everybody does relate to a very awkward or very embarrassing or very whatever use of it for sure.
Yeah.
I would agree.
And I was just like, maybe that's where the pendulum needs to swing, is get out of the high extremes of both and just kind of settle on the, how do we just make it more relatable and awkward and funny and just kind of keep it in that area. Cause that seems to work the best, unless you're a 13-year-old boy and then you're just like, nope, I need close-up shots of boobs in every movie. That's how it needs to be. Now, granted, it's so accessible anywhere, anytime for anyone that I think maybe that's not quite so prominent in like the younger generation, but
I wondered that as well, because a lot of the movies that I was thinking of and a lot of my feelings about it have to do with a pre-internet era where it was basically impossible for you to see a naked lady until someone let you see them naked for a very long time in human history. And so I do think that's largely why nudity rose to such heights in film for a very long time, especially 60s, 70s, and 80s, where that was the place you went if you wanted to. It was a huge selling factor.
Yeah.
And then as the internet comes around, people are like, I'd rather go see a movie that's entertaining and interesting and funny. I'm not as enticed by just a naked lady or promises of boobs anymore.
Yeah,
And that's good.
like the raunchy, I guess they were the raunchy teen comedies like American Pie. I don't think those movies would work as well these
Mm-hmm.
days because of the accessibility of it all, and you don't have to like. I guess there's no struggle to find nudity now,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's in film
Right.
or kids these days won't know what scrambled channels means. They probably won't even understand that joke, but like everyone in our age group probably just chuckled like you just did. So like
Yeah.
it was a struggle
Yeah.
back in the day to find nudity, and then I imagine even more so for generations before us. But it's yeah, I think the internet's kind of ruined a lot. It's kind of yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Fuck you, internet.
I'm not a prude in any sense of the word. I don't feel like you definitely need to hide any of that stuff or leave nudity out of things just because it's bad or anything like that. But I definitely do think that there's more meaning in most of life when you have to work a little harder to get it. Like if you make things too available to people, then they get very lazy about things and
Yeah.
stop building pyramids and doing great things just to make people happy. So I do think that there's times that that it's kind of that punk rock thing of swinging the pendulum back the other way, that maybe we don't need OnlyFans. Maybe we could benefit from having more intentionality around relationships and that that whole thing that you see in movies of like the coming of age story and like the first
Yeah.
time you get to first base and that excitement and stuff. I think loses some of its luster if you've seen a million movies and you've seen all this porn and stuff. It's like it kind of loses that magic that it had if it was like a John Hughes movie or something.
It's so funny how we just talked about. Well, I'm gonna say you included John Hughes movies, which like if you think like 16 Candles or any of his classics
Mm-hmm.
like that from the late 80s, those were our kind of movies, like those kind of romantic
Yeah.
gestures and stuff. Cool. And the actual awe of, oh my god, my crush is naked in front of me, or like how did I get myself in
Mm-hmm.
this situation. um and then you also use the words magic and porn in the same sentence, which is a little weird, but
Well, when you break it down like that, of
but I
course it's
know
gonna
what you
sound weird.
mean. Like I don't know if I would call it magical, but there was something different about pre-internet all over the place. I mean, we had a little bit of internet late 90s, so
Mm-hmm.
but if you wanted to, like, if you and your friends were going to log on and be like, let's find naked pictures, you had to hope
Mm-hmm.
for a handful of things to all like coalesce at the same time. One, you had to hope the dial-up internet logged on quick, which was always,
Mm-hmm.
that's a gamble in and of itself. You always
Yeah.
had to hope that the parent figures or both parents did not just walk into the room as it
Mm-hmm.
loads. And then the biggest one of them all was the moment you clicked on an image to download it to see it, let alone a
Mm-hmm.
video clip. You
Yeah,
had
you
to
have
be
no chance of
comfy.
seeing video.
Yeah, you had to get comfy because it was gonna take a while.
Yeah.
So there, I get what you mean with like the magic. You did have to earn it, I guess. You had to. It had a little more
Mm-hmm.
stake to it than it does these days. And maybe because I thought about that too, and I was like, we had a couple movies come out last year, one very serious, one absolutely not serious. Both featured shocking nudity in them. We
Mm-hmm.
had No Hard Feelings with Jennifer Lawrence, where she was like full frontal nude. And then Oppenheimer had your favorite sex scene of the year, I Am Become Death sex scene. Both took audiences off guard. Both became the same. And I thought about like, why? Because there's a lot of nude scenes in a lot of movies every year that people just kind of like, whatever, myself included. But those two were like, holy crap, there's like big time nudity, which I kind of argue with Oppenheimer because it's like, yeah, it's not, it's a sex scene, but I didn't feel that the nudity in Oppenheimer was near on the scale that so many people claimed it to be.
Well, I think a lot of the hype around it was partly around Christopher Nolan had never done a nude scene before.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal.
But I think what made him stick, not just because Nolan, that was the first time he's had nudity and sex in a film, but both those movies kind of like reverted back to that shock value, or that like, oh shit, like, and the nudity is actually like serving the characters. It's moving this story forward. So it was like practical nudity, if you will. Like it actually served a purpose. It wasn't just gratuitous. I'm sure some people are going to argue, yes, it was. You can argue that with any of the scenes, but those two movies, I feel, kind of helped combat that. Like, it's so accessible everywhere. It was just like, oh, here you go. And then it moved on with its life, which was the best part. So
yeah, Jennifer Lawrence in No Hard Feelings, that was definitely a hilarious scene and so kinetic. Any naked fight scene, I feel like, is very different than like walking around or sitting down scene. And it's more hilarious to be like, I can't believe you're having this fight now. And it's also, I mean, it's not the first time she's done a nude scene either. Maybe that helps, or maybe not. I don't know that most people remember like Red Sparrow, or I don't remember if she did nudity in Mother or not. But Red Sparrow, she does for sure.
She had a nude scene in Mother, but it wasn't a focal point. She just happened to be naked on a shot. But with
that's
Mother,
not the kind of movie that anybody feels good at any point.
Your anxiety's so high, you're not really noticing anything except the chaos around her. And then Red Sparrow, God, I hated that movie. That movie was just gross and kind of dumb. So I think that's why, and plus, like, no one saw it, so I think that's why it didn't really stick with anyone.
Yeah.
God, I forgot about that movie. Ugh.
But that's like a thing that you had mentioned before, that for actresses who are afraid of doing nudity for a very long time because they felt like it would ruin their career, and then more and more started doing it and realizing that it doesn't hurt your career. In fact, it could even help your career at a certain point. And then I think we've leveled out. I think the Me Too movement has kind of helped. I think of you don't have to by any means do it, but if you want to do it, it's not bad either. You can do that if you want to, and there are things to try and keep that more balanced. And they're less strict than like straight censors were, which were just hurting things, pushing the pendulum too far kind of stuff. They're more like, this is a thing we do. If you want it to go well, here's the best way to make it go well, and try to help everybody involved. So I think in general that's good.
Yeah, I feel like the power, it kind of feels weird using that phrase. Well, anyways, I feel like the power was actually given for the first time in all reality, completely given to the actors and actresses when it comes to a nude scene or a sex scene post Me Too. And I think that's a good thing. It's sad that the power wasn't always there for them. I think they should have always had that power to be able to say no and not have their career harmed, or say yes and not have their career harmed. Because there's plenty of actors and actresses that are all for it. I mean, Julianne Moore, we brought her up earlier. Shit, I think she's been naked in more than half of the movies that she's done. Like, she finds it empowering. She's okay with it. And that's good for her. Like, if that's how she views it, cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think as a
Yeah.
whole, post Me Too, especially actresses, were given complete control now that they always should have had to, actually have, put their foot down on something. So now when you see nudity in a
Yeah.
film, I think it's more comfortable to see it in a film these days because like, this was actually signed off. Everything was okayed. Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the intimacy coordinator and the what are they called, the nudity writer or whatever they are. I mean, there's like a
Yeah.
whole team now who are so strict and making sure everything is kept of what was agreed upon.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are going to change it, it's like a whole new mediation almost of like, well, no, you can't even change the camera angle without a whole
Mm-hmm.
new set of rules created. So I think I don't feel as gross seeing nudity or taken off guard with nudity these days, or, scenes where you're like, ooh, this is a little much. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I imagine it's still pretty awkward. You have to have a really good scene partner. I mean, you have to have a lot of trust in your scene partner to pull off some of
Yeah.
these scenes.
Oh, for sure.
And there's been times where I've watched a movie and been like I like that actor, but if I was that actress, would I really be feeling great of him like
Mm-hmm.
jackhammering me from behind right now? Like, I know you didn't see it, but there's a scene in Napoleon where Joaquin Phoenix
Yep.
is just like aiming for a heart attack or some shit as he's just railing his wife from behind. And you're like, this is not good. Like,
Yeah, a little excessive, sounds like.
very excessive. But that's another thing. I mean, I wonder how the studio would go about, like, if an actress or an actor suddenly have like kind of an unhealthy disconnect with their scene partner. Like, if suddenly
Mm-hmm.
there is, nope, something's off, this doesn't, like, not feeling safe, whatever. How does the studio approach that scene? Because I
Yeah.
imagine
It's definitely, I mean, they try their hardest to remove those power dynamics and make
Mhm.
everybody feel comfortable. But it's also kind of part of life that you can't really fully get away from. That if you are in a scene and you're opposite a giant actor and you complain too much and you're not comfortable, then they'll just be like, okay, feel free to leave because we're
right.
not getting rid of that guy because he is too important to this production. We're not going to make the money at the box office if his name's not on it and nobody knows who you are. So at least they won't be like, you have to, you got to get in there, you agree to all this stuff. It's like, you can walk away and that's fine. But there is still always that feeling of like, well, maybe I should just get over it. Maybe I should push my comfort zone past what I actually want to do. And that's unfortunate. You want to avoid that as much as possible.
And I feel like that's a very slippery slope.
Yeah.
To revert back to kind of the way the studios approached these scenes in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where it really was, you either do this or you have no career. Like, it's that guilt trip almost. Not almost, it flat out is.
Yeah.
I think that's a slippery slope. I would imagine or hope to that during pre-production, after casting is done, after the first table read is done, I would hope that there are some very long, intense conversations for your leads or the people that are going to be involved in those scenes to actually kind of meet, get to know each other. Like, you have to build a trust because you have to trust your scene partner. Just like you have to trust
Team
your
building,
director.
yeah.
You have to trust. Yeah, you have to trust these people. And man, when you're naked with someone, you're so vulnerable. And trust is such a huge factor. So that rings in my head a lot when I see some of these scenes of like, man, your trust is either crazy high, and I applaud you for that, because I feel like my trust would still be a little shaky if they're at all with some of these scenes.
Yeah.
Or there's sometimes where I just don't feel like the actors have good chemistry in general, and then they have to share these kinds of scenes, and you're like, this couldn't have been a positive experience on set. Like, you hear the horror stories, or not horror stories, sorry. You hear the lack of chemistry from what's her name? Dakota Johnson and what's his bucket when they did the 50 Shades films.
Yeah. Christian, whatever.
Yeah. All the stories I've ever heard coming, and I've never seen those movies, so I don't feel like I have full say or whatever. But everything I've heard from the production was they didn't get along all that great. There was no chemistry. They just were there for the paycheck. And I'm like, that'd be a big red flag to me. Like, you're just here for the paycheck. And you're expecting, like, I have to share the scene where I'm bound and blindfolded, and you're gonna have naked, like a minion over me. This is, I would imagine, like, hold up.
Yeah. Like, she's got some bigger balls than I do, that's for sure.
Yeah, just a little.
One of my favorite kind of, I guess, nudity arcs as far as power dynamics go has to be in Game of Thrones, where which is one of those funny shows that I feel like Game of Thrones would not be as huge as it was without the nudity in it. Like,
yeah, the nudity kind of became like a character of the show.
Everybody was kind of talking about the nudity in it, and sure, there were fans of the books that loved the fantasy aspect, but most of the other people were like, yeah, there's dragons and fights and stuff, but there's a lot of naked people in it. And that's always kind of been HBO's thing anyway, that they always have very good shows that are very geared towards adults that always have nudity in them at some point. And so the Game of Thrones was kind of just the next generation of it. But I feel like it took it to another level that everybody seemed to be talking about how much nudity was in it. And so when Emilia Clarke was Khaleesi in it, and in the first season, she does all these nude scenes and stuff, and then kind of comes to regret it, didn't really love doing it, didn't want to do it anymore, and decides she's not going to do it anymore. And so you have several seasons of her not doing it, and then the kind of changes to an empowering thing for her. Mm-hmm. And she has this scene where it's a very powerful scene, very, very explosive as far as her actual authority and capability and power, literally. And she's like, yeah, let's do, this is going to be a nude scene. We got to do this nude. It's going to be so incredible. And it is a great scene that I think everybody was psyched about. But it's just interesting how that arc changed of starting out on this show. Nobody really knows who you are, in the situation where you're not comfortable, able to avoid that, go on to become this huge star, and then kind of choose to retake that.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting.
I think that is her story with Game of Thrones. I do think is one of the best stories to come out of that show, because she did. I mean, after the first season, or maybe it was even after the second season, because she had nude scenes a lot in the early years of Game of Thrones. And I remember her in an interview towards the end of the series where she flat out said, like, I was sick and tired of having to be naked all the time. Like, there's more to me as an actress. There's more to this character than just always being naked. And I agree with you. I think that power shift where she refused the nudity, they like agreed with her and switched up some of the writing. They cleaned it up. I feel they may have, let's be honest, being told you're not going to have Emilia Clarke be naked anymore or have sex scenes anymore. They may have decided, well, we have to make up for that, so we'll up the ante with a few of these other scenes. Because as much as I love that show, there are definitely a lot of scenes where you're like, what the fuck is the reason? Why are
Yeah.
we watching this happen? Like the brothel
It seems like
scenes with Littlefinger,
every
like
small character that's never going to come back in any other episode is always
right.
naked.
You're like, this is so okay. Like let's move on.
Hmm.
But then for her to like, I'm gonna do this nude scene again towards the end of the series, and there it does feel different. It doesn't feel like, ooh, Amelia Clark is naked again. It felt like, ooh, this feels
Hmm.
empowering almost. God, Game of
Hmm.
Thrones is such a I'm shocked I didn't write more notes about Game of Thrones in terms of nudity and sex, because Game of Thrones definitely pushed boundaries. I know they got,
Yeah.
and I actually agree with, I was one of them that was bothered by how far they started pushing boundaries on certain things, you know. Um, Obviously, I feel the the Sansa rape scene is
Yeah.
like, come on, guys, this was so, like, you did not need this. We did not need to watch this happen. Um,
Yeah.
I know people argue that you did, but you're never going to convince me that was good. And it, obviously, it's one of those examples where that kind of sex scene happens that bothered so many people that
Hmm.
HBO literally stepped in at the end of that season and was like, so we're stepping away from like rape. Like we're basically taking it completely out, which was a good thing. You don't need it.
Right. Yeah, that was a thing we talked about in the most offensive movies ever episode, is that rape is particularly one of those things that you can imply it or even hint at the possibility of it and everybody gets it immediately.
Yeah.
Like you don't need to do any more than that. And there are so many movies, one in particular we talked about, I Spit on Your Grave.
Yeah.
Uh, that movie has multiple gang rapes, long, like half the movie is raping basically, and the payoff of her overcoming and going on a vendetta streak after that isn't really enough to really, like, it could have been cool if I didn't have to go through all of the actual
Right.
raping.
Yeah. When
That's
I
not
watched that
fun.
documentary again, they brought I Spit on Your Grave up and they were showing clips of the scenes. Dude, I literally
Hmm.
was like, well, I'm getting up during this. Like, I skipped that whole part of the documentary. I was just, you don't have to show it. There is
Yeah.
no empowerment in making those scenes. I can't believe it's shown in so many movies or shows. It just,
Hmm.
like, it's sad to me. It's really sad to me. And they were bringing it up in that documentary because she's nude, like, for the majority of that movie, she's naked.
Yeah.
And the actress was like, kind of, you know, defending the film, defending the stuff. And she brought up, well, you know, she gets her revenge. And I'm with
Hmm.
you, and I talked about it pretty extensively of like, it, the payoff is not worth it. It doesn't, that
Hmm.
shit is like seared in my brain. And I really wish it wasn't. And so when it like showed it again, my everything in me was like, nope, no, we ain't, nope, nope. Like,
Yeah. I feel like Hollywood or filmmakers have this belief that if you show a very intense rape scene, that it's like very true to life and gritty and important or whatever. But I don't know that they understand that normal people, pretty much all people, except for a couple of people who are completely disassociated from anything of actual relationship and humanity, normal people already know how terrible it is and how deeply affecting it is and all of that stuff. And so I think that you do more harm than good by
yeah.
making a very long drawn out realistic rape scene, because you're going to traumatize new people or re-trigger people who've been through something
See,
like
and
that
that's,
or whatever.
yeah, I think of the victims, whether they have family members or friends that have been
Hmm.
victims of that. to focus on it in a, on a show or in a film, to focus on it is like, I feel like you're kind of slapping these people in the face. You're like exploiting this horrible situation. And I understand that argument can be made for damn near everything shown in a film. But this one particularly is like, that's such a horrible thing that exists in our world, that so many people have been victims of or traumatized by, like it, and it runs in through generations. I mean, it affects generations. That ripple is crazy. So when a movie focuses on it and tries to have that mentality of like, ooh, we want to be as gritty and like real, you're not. You're just exploiting this horrible thing for your own profit. And I very much disagree with it. And to see like that documentary and the people associated with it were defending the nudity with it and saying like, well, there has to be nudity with this. It's a rape scene. And it's like, but the scene itself, so unnecessary. So you didn't need the nudity. You didn't need the actual act. It's that kind of stuff is very disheartening to me. And you and I mean, we have a whole episode based on how horrible watching this stuff was for both of us. And it's, I'm glad, I still say I'm kind of glad we still did it, because I think it helped give you and I like pretty clear definitions of where our lines are.
The worst movies ever.
Yeah. It is funny watching.
It gives me a lot more grace for movies now. And I'm like, it's not that bad. It may be the worst movie I've seen in years, but it's not that bad.
But compared,
yeah.
But yeah, what that kind of stuff is just so gross. It shocks me how many movies, how many writers out there are sitting down and being like, you know what we need right here? We're going to have some rape, but don't worry, we'll show her boobs. Like, gross.
Yeah.
Just
and
gross.
I feel like it gets even more complicated and gross in that this isn't like a story that you're telling for the purpose of like some meaningful information that you're just putting out in the world. It's not a painting that you're just showing that everybody can experience. Like, it's a for-profit business that you're trying to make money off of these ticket sales and video sales and all of that stuff. And so there's an exploitation level that you get to pretty quickly by showing this stuff, and you could say that there's an art to it, but there's a shock value too, and the press that comes with it, and people like, oh, I have to see if it's really as bad as everybody says, and that generates buzz and generates revenue and all of this stuff, and that it makes it even dirtier.
Yeah, shit. I mean, that's why I saw Poor Things, was because I had to see it for myself. I had to see, does it fall like on the, people are making something out of this that's not there? Is it really that bad, or is it like really that weird, yada yada? And it really was that bad. Like, that movie really bothered me very fucking much.
Yeah.
And I feel that movie's very exploitative, like, and I think it has done a great job at convincing people that it's art, when what it actually is exploiting, manipulation, and taking advantage of the young. And it's just, you shouldn't be doing that. And I'm kind of shocked Emma Stone has been so open about it and so like proud of it. And I did find myself at one point, because she's naked a lot in that movie, and I found myself thinking like, man, back to like sometimes leaving the imagination is better. I was like thinking of all that, because all of her earlier films, pre-Poor Things. So basically her whole career before this movie.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, like, I've been a fan of hers for so long. And if you want to, like, strip everything away and make it down to, like, her most attractive, I'm like, was when she wasn't sucked into everything Hollywood. I kind of wish she would get out of that and kind of get back to her basics, the silliness, you know, like Crazy Stupid Love. I think that's one of her best. La La Land is obviously my favorite of hers. Like that.
Even in Superbad. Yeah.
And Superbad, like those characters that she played, way more empowering. And it's crazy. I know, like, this sounds super purist. I don't mean for it to be that way. But those characters are not relying on having to be naked or having to have sex the whole time to move forward in their lives. That's not what it is. And that, to me, that's more like empowering of women or empowering of the story. And you don't even have to do a lot of that. God, Poor Things was gross. Sorry.
Yeah. That whole conversation went down pretty serious rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen Mary Poppins' boobs before?
I have. And
I didn't know until this week that Julie Andrews did a topless scene in a movie, and she did it for Blake Edwards, her husband, who did all of the Pink Panther movies. And in a movie called SOB, which is apparently not that good, but they used that kind of shock value of, you could see Julie Andrews, the most wholesome woman ever, take her top off in this movie. And it was kind of entertaining on a very thin, basic level.
Very thin level. Well, it's done as like kind of a joke, like obvious tongue in cheek, because he needed that final. He needed that gag. He needed that, like, oh shit. And I've never actually seen SOB. I've just seen the clips of it. And that scene. And I gotta tell you, like, considering Mary Poppins is my favorite family film ever, like, I adore that movie so much. Seeing her, like, rip her top off, my first thought wasn't, oh shit, Mary Poppins boobs. My first thought was like, huh, does that ruin Mary Poppins for me? It doesn't, don't worry.
Yeah.
But I think what's weird, I can't imagine that conversation between her husband and her, where he's saying, I need something to really sell this movie. You want to tear your top off, and I'm going to show your boobs to the world. That had to have been a weird conversation, right? Or maybe things are just so disconnected in Hollywood that those conversations are normal. I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know either. But yeah, it's certainly possible. So I was trying to think of, like, what are great examples of nudity where it actually makes sense to do and is a good reason to do it. And one example I had was Cabin in the Woods, because it does build on that trope that Hollywood has already established for decades. And I have that thought in my mind every time someone's like, oh, this so-and-so gets naked in this movie. How exciting is that? Is that line that he says, your basic human needs disgust me.
Right. You know, I don't want to give Joss Whedon too much credit, considering he turned out to be one of, like, the worst ones out there, but he did write that joke perfectly. Yeah. The whole trope of, come on, show us your boobs. Come on. We have to see them. And like it's written so well and makes sense to that story so well. Well, it makes sense to the whole genre, honestly. You couldn't have had that scene without that trope and without that line of like your basic human needs disgust me. That might be the best use of nudity in a film, actually. I mean, because you're.
I also really like. You finish.
I was going to say, but see, that fits my argument. The best times nudity works is when it's a joke, when it's tongue in cheek. That's when it's the best.
I have 3 serious ones, and I know at least one of them you'll agree with.
Okay.
The first one, though, that I don't know what you'll think about is Eastern Promises. The Hugo, no, what's his name? I almost said Hugo Weaving, and that's certainly not Hugo Weaving.
That is not Hugo Weaving. Viggo Mortensen.
Viggo Mortensen, thank you. The scene in the sauna when he gets ambushed and they have a naked fight in the sauna. It just makes sense. If you're in the sauna and you get attacked by an assassin, you got to fight back. You can't wait for a towel. You got to do what you got to do, kind of thing. I think that one works really well. Possibly the most meaningful, maybe second most meaningful, Ex Machina. The scenes where she discovers like the android bodies in the closet, and there's nudity in that movie, but it never took me out of it. It was always, I was very much in her space where, and also I think how the audience is supposed to perceive it is that this guy who's building these androids is building these things who he hopes will become sentient people, basically. Mm-hmm. But until they achieve that, they're basically objects that he is controlling, and chooses to make them women, beautiful women, and has them anatomically correct and fully naked and all this stuff. And so it gives you a certain perception of him and all of that. Well, also there's a lot of practical applications as well, where she kind of like uses the skin or rebuilds herself or whatever. And it is not used in a way that comes across as anything but good.
There's one scene where the nudity is sexualized. It's when he's like drunk and dancing with the one android. But other than that, the nudity that's in that film for the most part isn't sexualized. It's done as like kind of science-y. Like he's aiming for anatomically correct kind of stuff. It's like the nudity,
trying to create the most perfect human. Yeah.
It's like the nudity in Autopsy of Jane Doe. I absolutely love that film. Tons of nudity in it, but that's because it's a corpse on an autopsy table.
Cadaver.
Zero sexualization period in that film. Yeah. What was your next example?
And then the last one, which I know you'll agree with, there is sexualization to it, but I think it's done in the best way, which is Requiem for a Dream, which we just talked about pretty recently. And having the Jennifer Connelly in that situation, you're not, even though the characters are objectifying her and making her and putting her in a sexual situation like that, the audience is very much not. The audience is very much where Darren Aronofsky wants you to be, which is just feeling for her and feeling for the situation that she had gone through and what led her here, and her helplessness and getting out of it. That's kind of the best one I could think of.
Yeah, that is a good example of like the use of the nudity, and it is a sexualized scene, but like you said, the way it's shot and edited, you as an audience are, I mean, it's like basically close-ups of her face the whole time with a couple wider shots. But you as the audience, you're supposed to, I mean, he's making sure if your heart wasn't broke already, I am about to just fucking shatter it. So you are so emotionally drained and invested in just feeling so sad and broken for her and with her that, you as the audience, you're not going to take it as, I mean, unless there's something really fucked up with you, in which case,
right?
There's doctors out there.
There's count for those.
Yeah.
I was gonna make that joke about Autopsy of Jane Doe. I was like, If people do sexual things with cadavers too, it doesn't
I mean,
really, you
that's
can't really
true. And
account for
those
that.
people, there are institutions for people like that. I mean, I get
Yeah.
like, I forget what I heard a line or a joke. I can't even remember where it was. Anyways, it was a long time ago, but it was like, I saw this argument of people can't choose their fetishes or something like that. And instantly was like,
Okay.
no, I'm pretty sure you can. Like, nope, we are not going down that route.
Yeah.
That is a excuse to be dangerous, and we're just not
Mhm.
down for that. So
Yeah.
nope.
Yeah. There's a lot of people making excuses for a lot of weird behavior for sure.
Yeah. Um See, I didn't even try to think of like the best uses of nudity for, well, I guess I brought up Forgetting Sarah Marshall, which is the funniest use
Yeah,
for me. Uh,
for sure.
that scene will always, from the first time I saw that movie, and even now, and the movie's been out since, when was that, 2009, 7,
Um,
however long,
7 probably. 8. It was 8.
2008. Damn, I was like,
Yeah.
man, I am so close most of the time.
You really are good at
So
that date
fun.
thing.
Um,
I don't even pay attention.
that nudity is still it will never not be hilarious to me, and it's never gross. It's not even
Mhm.
sexualized. It's just so funny. And as a guy, you laugh at a couple parts of it, right? So you laugh at just the fact that he's standing there getting dumped and he lets the towel fall.
Mhm.
But I think the part that every guy really laughs at, and you don't even see anything, but you can hear it, is when he does the
Yeah.
"I got a surprise for you." If you're
Clap,
a
clap,
male
clap.
and you're listening to this
Yeah.
and you're like, I don't relate to that scene, I'm just
You've
gonna
never
call you.
lived.
I'm gonna call bullshit. I'm flat out calling bullshit because I'm pretty positive every guy has done that. But um,
Yeah.
and then
But it's such a funny thing because it's not the kind of thing that you would do to entice a mate. Like
at
nobody is
all,
finding that.
like,
Yeah,
unless you
it's
are
more
so
off-putting.
invested into the like you're that comfortable that
Mhm.
it's silly, it's so goofy and
Yeah,
ridiculous, you're
you
not
can
gonna
find the hilariousness of it
yeah,
attractive for sure.
yeah. um yeah, I didn't really think of like the best uses or like top three or whatever. Not that you had the
Mhm.
top three, but uh I brought up
Yeah,
American
that
Pie
came to mind.
earlier. That movie is gratuitous, but it's gratuitous, and like the joke factor of it is there because
Mhm.
every adolescent boy is instantly like, and it was the big, came out in 99, so the internet was, or 97, sorry, internet was still fresh, still pretty new. And I
Mhm.
think Nadia's scene for every boy was just like, holy crap, they turned it into like a gross joke. And then for Hollywood to then come out with Not Another Teen Movie and just completely make fun of that whole thing, just blatantly, and just
Yeah.
like, we're just gonna, it might be the most gratuitous thing ever put on film, but we're gonna make sure the joke is understood
Yeah.
by all.
Yeah, have the exchange student naked in every situation for the entire
The
movie.
entire movie, like, super awkward for the actress, but the
Mhm.
joke comes off so well. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then I brought it up earlier. I'm not even a big fan of the movie, but Titanic scene with Rose and the drawing.
Mhm.
It's so weird to say this, but I'm not sure Titanic would have had the same effect without that scene, and not just because she's like, oh, we see Kate Winslet's boobs, because if you look at her career, you had already seen her boobs up to that movie.
Right.
But that drawing and that moment is so vital to like her story that the movie, I just don't think would have been the same without it.
Yeah, it's kind of for her character, it's a pretty important moment where she kind of decides to leave the life that she had planned or was planned for her and decides to give herself over to this new love kind of thing.
Yeah. But I think that scene handles the nudity well enough. So
yeah,
there you go, James Cameron. We gave you a little bit of credit, little bit.
Yeah, few and far between, but that's good.
But there's so much nudity.
I also had there's a lot of nudity. Like the last main thought I had was on the topic of body doubles and going back to our discussions about Blade Runner, how that's even more complicated now with AI.
Yeah.
That if there aren't new clauses added to the nudity rider and stuff to account for this kind of stuff, the actress never has to be naked, but they can make a very detailed and very computer generated, accurate as possible kind of scene, put you in it and make you do pretty much whatever they want you to do without your agreement, unless they actively start working on putting those agreements in place and protections there, because that just happened with Taylor Swift. A bunch of online AI generated images of her came up and everybody started freaking out. This has happened. I mean, deep fakes and all this other stuff has happened forever, but it takes the biggest pop star in the world for actually people to start paying attention, I guess. So I think it's good to draw attention to and something to be concerned about.
Yeah. For anyone that's like listened to you and I long enough, know our opinion on AI and the reliance and progressiveness of it. For those just listening, that's heavy quotes, like catch the sarcasm. I think AI in film is so dangerous, and I think it could potentially be so damaging for actors and actresses in terms of exactly what you just said, where that could be the next gray area for production studios. And I think that's such a dangerous route that could potentially be taken, because you're exploiting the likeness and you're going to be putting this stuff out there without the consent. I mean, AI in film. It's a frightening thought. And I've heard people argue AI in general, and they keep saying like, but it's progress and this is good for us. And I'm always like, no, it's pure evil. And my daughter and I are actually just talking about deep fakes yesterday. And I was explaining to her how deep fakes were kind of used to like damage careers. And that wasn't even like nude deep fake stuff.
Yeah.
You imagine what would happen if suddenly there's deep fakes. You brought up Taylor Swift. She's like the most loved pop star in history. I mean, she's a billionaire. Right. I think she just became officially a billionaire.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Huge voice of young women and women in general. I mean, she's huge. Whether you're a fan of her music or not, you can't deny her success. I think it would be heartbreaking if suddenly, I guess you could say, the X-rated deep fake AI stuff starts coming out to try and tarnish her image. It's just, you can't afford to put anyone off these days without someone knowing how to like truly get at you. It's so dangerous. It's so evil. I don't see any progress or any positivity in it. It's frightening to me.
Very
frightening.
I think you're definitely right that it is one of the next gray areas, and it's concerning in the sense that Hollywood has always kind of pushed those boundaries, and in a sense, it is the job of art to push boundaries and stuff, but I don't think, kind of like what we talked about already, that just pushing boundaries for boundaries' sake is not necessarily good.
Right.
That you kind of, it should be the job of art to know what boundaries need pushing and what boundaries need supporting. That maybe that's a good boundary. You should expect, like, shore up that boundary and make it even stronger.
Yeah, art should challenge. 100% art should challenge everybody on every side of the belief. Like, it should do that. That's its job. Pushing boundaries comes with the challenge. But I think part of that challenge should also be to know a limit. Like, there are just certain things. This is wrong. If you're trying to challenge one specific group of people, then you need to, like, kind of do it intelligently, not just exploitive or whatever. You know, you need to have real purpose, and you need to make sure your purpose comes across clear. I think
Right.
metaphors are awesome and important, especially in storytelling, but I feel so many writers, filmmakers, whatever, get so caught up in overuse of the metaphor, it turns into that art house kind of thing. And then when you think you're being challenging, you're actually just being exploitive, or you're just being gross. And we have seen movies where you can see that line get crossed. And a lot of those movies, I feel, were not accidental. And I think you agree with me on the artist kind of loses focus and loses the point of it and decides, well, this is edgy, so that's what I want to focus on. And you're like, yeah. If you really want to challenge then you need to actually challenge the subject, and you can challenge a subject without focusing only on being edgy. It's such a dangerous, slippery, like, there's almost too many gray areas that lead into so much danger. That's why we need the pendulum to kind of find that middle ground.
Yeah, that would be good.
Nudity.
Well,
I don't have too much.
I feel like we covered it. That's the history.
Covered quite a bit.
The state of nudity in film.
Yeah. Whoo, nudity. Hey, we managed to still keep it, like, kind of silly at moments. I mean, we did it.
We did our best. Yeah.
We did our best. I know it's a hot topic. It can be kind of an uncomfortable topic. Trust me, watching certain scenes in movies or knowing certain things in film and stories, it is uncomfortable. Nudity is such a weird topic to bring up because you want to laugh at most of it, but then you see stuff that you're like, this isn't funny at all. So
I was very much questioning how much of my perception was through my American lens also, because I know Europeans, for all of this time that Hollywood had the Hays Code and the Ministry of Justice, or whatever it was called, and they had all of this other, like, stuff going on in America and Hollywood that was censoring and banning nudity. Europe never bothered with that. They put out nudity in film all the time, didn't really care, never had a problem. So I'm very curious what that would have been like how much of society is formed around that hang up that we experience here and have for so long, that it's a hang up, and then it's taboo, and then it's exciting, and then it's all stuff. If you don't have any of that, how different is the world? I wonder.
Well, I feel like obviously we'll never know unless we tap into parallel universes, but that's for a different episode. It's funny, and you guys will find out later.
That was a very specific statement.
But I think there's pros and cons to the way that Europe was as well. I think they have I would argue, equal amounts of dangerous gray areas and having it be so normalized over there. I
True.
think to have it pretty prominent from the get-go across the pond kind of desensitizes from a very, like, almost right out the gate, or at least you're going to get to desensitization quicker. And being desensitized to stuff, that's always kind of not a good area to get into, because if you're not feeling anything for it, then you're kind of more okay with certain things happening, and that's boundaries are crossed, and that's how you get into destruction of a species. So, but
Yeah, I agree.
I think there's pros and cons on how both sides handled nudity. I think one is just kind of more in the limelight because it's the home of, California is the home of the
Hollywood.
place, right? Hollywood is the heart of it all. So, in the limelight way more often, but yeah, it'd be curious to, I don't know. And we have friends across the pond, so let us know, like, what are your takes on nudity and the sex scenes? Like, do you get triggered by them, or are they just kind of in passing? You don't even really notice them.
Do you love them, or they're just the most delightful?
Love them? Do you
ever?
think like, are you in your 30s still pausing the movie on a nude scene? If you are, buddy,
touch grass.
Like, get outside, man. Get outside.
Yeah.
I think it's a hot topic. I think it's we left a lot open for more discussion. So join the talk. Let us know your thoughts on it and all that.
Yeah, very curious. Not really any wrong answers.
Well,
all right. Yeah,
there can still be a wrong answer, but
okay, there are wrong answers. If you pause the autopsy of a Jane Doe or whatever else, there's limits for sure.
Yeah.
So we mentioned last time earlier in the episode. Next time we are talking about Dune, the original, wonderful 1984 David Lynch Dune, just in time for Dune Part 2 to come out from the great Denis Villeneuve, and so that will be a very exciting time. More science fiction. We had never seen it. We watched it. It was crazy, and we had a lot of thoughts about it.
We had a lot to say about it. That is for sure. Yeah. It was still a fun time. So be prepared for that.
Don't give anything away.
Yeah. Enjoy that one when it comes out. Obviously, we're going to encourage you go see Dune Part 2 when it releases. I know you and I have been chomping at the bit for this freaking movie. I know, especially you. Yeah. So very excited.
Yeah, hyped.
Can't wait for March. And then also be keeping an eye out. We got the Boners Awards coming your way.
Yes.
So,
also in March. March will be a big month.
Yes, March is going to be a blast. So keep watching the stories. You're going to see all the polls and all the stuff come up. So get your votes in. And I think that's about it, right?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you, guys.